Hello everybody, I'm here in Nunhead Cemetery, sitting in the trees, going to discuss horned gods and horned goddesses with Trefor Wickens. Thank you ever so much for joining me, Trevor.
Oh, thank you, Debbie, for inviting me to meet in a lovely cemetery, a local spot I enjoy using and wandering around.
Well, we thought today we'd talk about horned gods and horned goddesses because recently I bought one of your wonderful statues of a horned god, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to do some more shows about this kind of subject? So I wanted to ask you, if you didn't mind, I'll just throw you in at the deep end. What is the horned god or the horned goddess to you, Trevor?
I've been working with Antlered. I work with what I call an antlered goddess and an antlered god. I kind of get sort of like funny about the particulars of it, whether it's an antlered or horned god. But so I worked with antlered goddess and gods since I was very young, since probably about 12. Because before that I was doing stuff, but it wasn't specifically relating to a religious belief system. And I first worked with a goddess which I call Trefor or Herfra, which to me appeared as an antlered woman. Nowadays there's the popularity of Ellen of the Ways, which is sometimes I put my figures that I produce under that name, because people tend to recognise that as being an antlered female divinity. And then also Herne, which obviously people are more familiar with, but in my workings with him, he quite often appears winged, so I've produced a number of statues of this figure, and that kind of gets into me working and making figures. Is originally the reason I started making statues and figures is because I couldn't find any of the goddess and gods I was working with at the time, going back many years. This is like, I don't know, 40 odd years ago, 45 years ago. So there just really wasn't much, to be honest, around representing it, because there was lots of pans and certainly horned figures, but there wasn't so much of the antlered figures back then. And at the time, the only antlered goddess I'd ever seen was, when I was about 18, I discovered the antlered goddess in the British Museum, and that's the only one I've ever seen, and I think still is the only archaeological find in that format. But to me, I've always been working, despite growing up in Peckham and Nunhead and Dulwich, which is like a South London suburb, but as where we are sitting at the moment, it's actually blessed with quite a lot of greenery. We have the cemeteries, we have quite a few cemeteries. We have Nunhead Cemetery, we have Camberwell Cemetery, we have Brenchley Gardens, which sits astride the hill of One Tree Hill, and then we have Dulwich and Sydenham Woods. And so we were quite blessed with greenery growing up. It was when I wasn't at school or stuck in my room reading stuff, I used to tend to go out in nature, and particularly really Dulwich Woods and Sydenham Woods and One Tree Hill were my favourites. I mean, yes, growing up I spent a lot of time in Peckham Rye, which was not quite as well used as it is now. Back then, people didn't really use Peckham Rye that much. And connecting with nature around me, and I quite often, especially in the woods, particularly where it was more isolated. I mean, Sydenham Woods now is like full of dog walk because it's almost 24/7, but when I was young, you'd see the occasional adult and not that many kids, to be honest. It was fairly empty.
Yeah, I could say the same for the woods I grew up in. But they're still part of the old ancient woods. Them woods have been there for a long time, haven't they? So they've still got that ancient mystery about them.
Oh yes, I mean, all this area, all the sort of woodland we still have is part of the Great North Wood, which stretched sort of like south from Peckham all the way down to Croydon. And obviously covered Norwood and all that sort of areas where they get their name, Forest Eel, etc. Although back then One Tree Hill was the One Tree Hill, because there wasn't really any other trees apart from what was then originally the ancient oak, and since has been replaced with a modern one, which, say modern, it's over 100 years old, but it's relatively modern in terms of oaks. So yes, I've always connected with the natural realm, particularly trees and spirits. I've always seen spirits my whole life, whether it's like small divas, human, ghosts, deceased creatures, and all the other kinds of spirits of what people would describe as fae, fairy, but not little things with wings, big fairies, human-sized fairies. Nature spirits, gnomes, you name it. I grew up seeing it.
Do you think that's because you, obviously, well, you're attuned to them because you're, like me, we're all slightly different that are into this kind of path, but because they're on a different vibration to the secular world?
Yes, I do fairy walks usually a couple of times a year. In woods, and I take groups of a dozen or more people, and I take them to places where I have a good interaction with the spirits there, and it's usually nearly everybody who's ever done this, and I've been doing those for like 20 years, experiences or sees or touches one of the non-human spirits, and my point of my thought is that you're more inclined to see nature spirits weirdly in a place like a Dulwich Woods or an old cemetery than perhaps you would see in the countryside, because the spirits who exist for very, very long periods of times tend to not favour the concrete and the brick and stuff. So the nature spirits kind of almost, you could say, overpopulate the green spaces that they have in places like London, because that is where they've ended up going once humans have destroyed and come to take over their previous living spaces. And I can think back not a few years ago when there was a development going on, and one of the nature spirits ended up in somebody's house who was sensitive and ended up causing havoc because they'd come into the house, and they were kind of being almost poltergeist-like, and anyway, I was called in and then sort of escorted it back to, I moved it on to some woodland that wasn't that far away from where it originally would have been.
So do you think that it was a bit lost, he or she, whatever it was, because it lost its place from this development? It didn't know what to do or go?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. It was like, we tend not to, it depends on the type of spirit or energy that's working, but humans destroy an old habitat, and this was an old habitat, and there was businesses with the council obviously getting backhanders at the time to do the development where they shouldn't have been doing the development. So it panicked, yes, it was panicked into going to the nearest other area, which happened to be these flats that were near to where the old trees used to be. But that's kind of me going at a tangent there. So
that's fine, that's what these shows do.
So I won't say for me there's at the Orn gods or Antlered goddesses are, they are, to me, growing up with all this sort of stuff, they are spirits, they exist, they existed long before we were around. I mean, we've anthropomorphised, we've made them look semi-human and stuff, and sometimes they do appear to us like that. But obviously they will appear and to us, and our brain will filter them as it does, because really they're very primeval and very beyond, you know, the nature spirits and the spirits of the wood or spirits of whatever, the water, they have different time spans in terms of their existence, and some of them are so ancient that they predate us by many millennia. And certainly the antlered, to me, the antlered or horned gods and goddesses, in my workings with them, we're just children. We've barely risen out of our cribs, because they've been around so much longer than we have. So we, you know, from my, I'm trained as an anthropologist, from my anthropological type of view, it'd be like, oh yes, we've created these spirits, and we've worked with, our ancestors worked with these spirits in a way of dealing with our interactions with the world around. But no, my experience and my communication with Trefor and Hern is that they existed long before us. They existed long before our ancestors, before the Neanderthals, before whoever. They were already in existence. They take forms sometimes which we understand better as being more goddess-like, but
we've got the doggies coming to see us. Hi. Well, we got disturbed by a few little doggies, but it was fun watching them play. I can't remember where we got to, but
no, I can't either.
I'm going to ask the question. I did forget that, yeah, there is a difference between antlered gods and horned gods, and I suppose we should differentiate that these antlers, like in the pictures we've got going to this video, they're kind of like deers or that kind of character to them. Why would that be?
I'm not quite sure, but I mean, my association is that they connect with the deers, and in various kind of associations, deers are seen as being energetically mystical animals and sacred in many cultures. Now obviously on a practical level, yes, that's because they were good resources, but it's also because they often have been used by people historically, not only as a means of tools and food, etc., but they are guiders. They have guided people through generations to places, back and from places. But also, for me, the antlered goddesses are more associated perhaps in Britain, maybe, because we were very much a forested country, with the woods, and they have a connection with almost like the trees and the branches of the trees, and these are like an extension of this manifestation. I mean, quite often people see antlered figures in the trees. They, you know, many people take pictures of trees. It used to be very popular. It's like, oh, you can see her in this tree, and now a lot of people see Ellen of the Ways in trees and in the branches of the trees, and it's that kind of energetic rising. And then historically, this whole thing of energy being seen manifests above the heads of people, creatures, etc., has presented itself as this connection of energy from the very grounded nature of antlered deities to their connection to the sky, to the worlds above. But for me, it represents this connection with the forests, and that's where I see as they kind of manifest their closest. They're closest to that manifesting the energy of the woods.
got another dog come and join us. They've all come to join us. Hi, that's all right. He was very friendly.
Okay, as long as you haven't got any food on you,
It'd be nice if a deer or a stag came running through now, but instead we're just getting dogged from people.
Yes, get lots of dogs and no deer that are visible here. There was occasions in the 80s where I mean, I've seen deer, or as I say, antlered deities in this area over numerous years. But there was an occasion which quite amused me when I had a person who came to me and was very troubled about her experience because she'd seen a deer running down the street in Dulwich, and I knew at the time that what she was seeing was actually a spirit deer because of it connected in with something I'd been doing that night locally. But it was quite amusing that somebody who wasn't into any of this and wasn't connected to this, she came into the old New Age shop that used to be in Peckham, crystal shop. I used to sometimes work in, telling me about this problem, and I just was noddingly agreeing and saying, oh yeah, it's very unusual, knowing that this was actually a manifestation for something that I'd been doing up at One Tree Hill the night before. And that goes back to the idea of seeing these deities, seeing nature spirits. Historically, people saw lots more of these things because there was that connection. People were open to seeing it, whereas people these days, the general populace, not necessarily the cult or esoteric people, are kind of, don't see these things, or if they do see them, won't tell anybody. Like this woman who came and spoke to me all those years ago, because they don't want to be considered mad or,
of course, yes,
crazy, but they still see them anyway. And over the years of running the fairy walks and stuff like that, so many people have said, have come along and afterwards have said, oh yes, well, I saw this when I was a kid, or I saw this when I was a teenager, but I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want people to think I was mad or odd or strange.
Yeah, but I've encountered the same kind of people, especially when we used to do the UFO talks years ago. And people would come that would poo-poo it all, and then later they'd, when no one was around, they'd come and, take me into a corner and say, well, actually, I did see a UFO, blah, blah, blah. So I know what them kind of people must be coming from. It must be weird since it is so poo-pooed in the mainstream, but it's seen as fantasy, or you only see it on fantasy TV. It's not a real thing. They don't seem to understand that there's more to this world, or don't want to. They're trying to rationalise everything, aren't they?
Yes, we over-rationalise the world around us because it makes us feel safe, I suppose, for those people. People, like to know what they're dealing with and what they're getting.
A bit of tree nice bit of leafage just fell on past Trevor's head. Yeah. See, they're just agreeing with us and saying, yes, you're saying the right thing.
Yeah. And yes, and the spirits of the wood are quite happy with that conversation. But yes, going back to all the antlered gods, and what I was going to say actually on from that about I feel the antlered ones are more connected in with the woodlands, and maybe the British woodlands, is the horn gods to me, and obviously Greek, I tend to associate more with the moors and with the agricultural places. That's been my experience. Yes, traditionally Pan, Puk, and certainly there is going to Puk or Puck or Pan, Peckham, which is obviously Nunhead is next to. Some people say that Peckham gets its name from the for the spirit, Puck being a spirit, Peck being a derivation of Puck, and therefore, you know, Peckham is the hamlet next to the village of the River of Spirits, because the Peckham gets its name from the River Peck, which runs, well, you can only see a bit of it now in Peckham Rye Park, but you can't see it anywhere else. But
it's all underground now, isn't it?
Yeah, the majority
as
of
most
it's
of London's
underground.
rivers are.
So to me, generally, as I see the sort of more horned figures like the Pans as being more like connected with that kind of open areas, the agriculture areas, the moorland, the abandoned places, you know, the bits that aren't quite so easy to be in, on the hilltops, mountain tops, places like that. Whereas for me, I find the antlered figures I find more in the woods, which certainly with British deer, that tends to be where you mostly find British deer. Now the other thing is obviously antlered figures. I more work with the goddess figure, the antlered goddess Aethra, or, you know, people call her Ellen of the Ways. And what's interesting is, like, historically, obviously, this must connect, maybe, if we're going down the sort of like as being a spirit that connects in with people, and it's something to do with people's collective unconscious. In Britain, we haven't had reindeer since the 12th century, and reindeer are the only ones where the female has deers and female has antlers all year round, whereas the male reindeer loses their antlers. So is the Ellen of the Ways, is Aethra some subconscious or connected memory to our workings and connectedness with the reindeer, like the Sami or Siberian herders? Is this some sort of spirit form that's existed from then? Or is it, as I think, a more predated and much earlier pre-human deity?
Do you think that also everything seemed to go underground because, you know, Christianity came along and tried to take over all the pagan ways and add them to their own theology? But do you think also that's also why it went a lot underground? Because from my own studies, I see that the people didn't want to give up them kind of ways, did they, in them times?
No. I mean, there's people were still using antlered figures. You know, got the Abbots Bromley horn dance. You've got the got the horned fair that used to be at Charlton, which was eventually banned for being too rowdy. So yes, despite the church and, you know, being there for some time, you know, the Abbots Bromley is carried on most of the time, and certainly the various country fairs, and as I say, the Horn Fair, which was around, I can't remember when it finished. It was, and then, I mean, it's been revived, but I think it was 1800s, early 1800s or something. It was banned because of affecting Victorian sensibilities.
But they were so delicate in those days.
And also, I believe there was fairs in other places where the use of they called them on fairs, but often it would be antlers. It would be bull's horns, but it'd also be antlers. I mean, if you think of bull's horns, you've got the Hussa tradition as well. So people carried on this belief and connection, and seeing the energy, the fertility, the divinity in the antlered and horned figures in Britain and obviously other places as well.
I get asked a lot, and you're going to explain this much better than I can. People ask me, is Herne and I'm going to say Coronis, though we were debating about how this was said before, are they the same figure?
Well, the linguistics business aside of Coronis, meaning there's various interpretations. Sometimes some people say Canunus is referring to the stone, because there's only really one figure named, which is a Romano-Celtic, Gaulish stone figure, and then we got the Gunderstrup Cauldron, but obviously it's not named who the figure is on that. It's assumed, because we have this one figure that has the name on it, we're assuming that this means. And then you've got CERN can also sometimes be interpreted, I can't remember which language, but just off the top of my head, and so CERN is also can mean curved or bent. So the curve of the Orms. So we have like Herne Bay. Some people say, this is because of the curved nature of the coast there. Then we have Herne Hill in London. I don't know if I'm dropping my H's, South London accent. Apologies. And this, some people are saying this is because of the shape of the hill, which is the source of the river Ephra. Or it could even refer to the winding nature of the Ephra. But people and other people say it refers to it being a place where herons are, because the etymology, once you go back long enough, is like words mean several different things, and whereas we tend to think they have a broader meaning of terms, as I say, like CERN means stone, it means curve, it can mean various things. So to me, Canunus is this Celtic, Gaulish figure, and Ern is just a British and English way of describing the same figure. Now, I tend to believe that the spirits or energies or gods and goddesses do have a localised nature to them. Like I've been running workshops for many years, apart from the stuff I've done with the covens, or groups. I've had covens and groups, whichever way you want to describe it. Is that it's very much that these ancient gods, goddesses are kind of resident and rely in a way with areas. So maybe Canunus is actually a European or French or Germanic version of the Antlered god, and maybe Herne is a British. You could see Herne as being a British manifestation of an Antlered god. And I think, to me, I don't see this thing of gods existing in all places, in all times, in all areas. They're certainly ancient, but I think they very much have a connection of the place. And this place, could be very large, or it could be quite small. And I feel we have, like the wood guardians, a lot of woods have like guardian spirits, and if you like, they're the gods of that woodland. So it depends on how you define a god. We tend to, despite our pagan natures or esoteric natures, we tend to focus on gods in almost a Abrahamic, Christo-Abrahamic way, in that we sort of think of God, God, it must be a God of, omnipresent everywhere, and this is kind of a very Judaic, Christian, Islamic concept, whereas in other cultures their gods are local beings, which is why they are polytheistic, why there is so many sometimes. And if you can kind of go back and think to Christians with all their saints are made up, the saints which were pagan gods and goddesses originally, then these are spirits or gods of the place. And to me, Herne is our British antlered god. Eleanor the Ways is our British antlered god, and there are antlered gods and goddesses in Europe with different names. And I think, to me, Canunus is the same. Canunus is Europe, mainland Europe, Celtic manifestation of this divinity of the wood.
Well, I have a lot of listeners from different parts of the world, obviously, but they should be able to go into any woodland and perhaps call upon the antlered god of that area to, I don't know, walk with them.
Yeah, I mean, there's antlered, I can't remember the names, but there's certainly antlered figures in India, in China, Chinese mythology, and Eastern European mythology.
I was thinking American Indian as
certainly
well.
American,
Like when I was out there was loads of statues with
there's
the deer.
There's a deer goddess as well, which I think it's just called deer woman or something like that. So yes, most cultures where there are deer, where there's forest, you will get a manifestation of this antlered figure, and I would say just use whatever is the name that's local or you feel comfortable with. It's entirely your choice, because human words mean zilch to the deities anyway. They sometimes communicate in our own languages, but more often than not it's in a system of imagery, so as long as you're expressing the words you're using or the images you're using with the right frame of mind, they will respond.
That's good words for everybody, so do take that into consideration, because I've been trying to encourage people to get out into nature more in my shows. But will you be doing your walks again this year or soon? And if so, where would people find out about them?
Basically, I should be doing some ferry walks this year. I've been away from Dulwich for the last 5 years, so because I can experience them, but because to do the ferry walks and to be successful, i.e. people to see and experience them and to be able to touch, we do some things where we touch spirits. I have to re-establish that working relationship, so I'm in the process of doing that now with the spirits here.
I'm sure they'll be pleased you're back around. Unlike a cat that I've been recently house sitting, when his owners came back, he was not happy they'd gone away. But yeah. I'm sure they're not like that.
No, they're not. It's just some areas have been recently these natural areas in the good things of woodland management, but unfortunately sometimes woodland management can be a bit too over enthusiastic, and the nature spirits don't necessarily like it. So yes, I'll be doing them this year, probably later on this month, and certainly by the autumn. And these will be advertised on one of my pages, Ghosts and Spirits of the British Isles, which is a Facebook group I run, where I advertise some of workshops, and people discuss or write their experiences of ghosts and spirits that they've encountered. So that's on Facebook, and then there's also an herb and folk magic page where I usually advertise my workshops and walks and stuff.
Could you just spell that one for us? Oh, sorry, it's my phone ringing. I forgot to turn it off.
So, herb with an H. So,
yeah, urban.
No, so herb, Herb, and folk magic on Facebook. There's a page there, and that's where I mostly advertise my sort of workshop type stuff and all the walks. And yes, and if you want to read about some of my experiences and other people's experiences, then look at the Ghosts and Spirits of the British Isles Facebook page, because there's a fair bit of a write up some of the stuff I've done, or ghost busting things I've done, etc. is on that page.
Yeah, that is a good one, because I'm a member of that one. I'm sure the other one is as well, but I often am looking at that when the posts come up. And we're using pictures of your wonderful artwork for this video. Where would people, if they were interested in purchasing a piece, which I encourage?
There's Antlered Goddess Sculptures, which is my Etsy page, if I remember correctly. And also there's another Facebook page, which name I've just forgotten.
We're just going to quickly look it up for
So
everyone.
I'm just going to look it up.
But I shall also add this into the little box below this video so that there'll be links.
So yeah, so for purchasing, then there's the Antlered Goddess and God Sculptures by Trevor Facebook page. That's there, and then there's links on there to like other shops, Etsy, eBay, and there's also Trefor as the Antlered White Goddess of the Woods, which I do put sculptures on, but I also put some stuff about antlered gods and goddesses on there as a sort of a more general information page. Yeah.
Well, people do go and look at Trevor's work, and I hope to see some of you on his walks, and I would like to thank you very much, Trevor. May the antlered gods walk with us all.
Thank you, Debbie, and likewise.
Until next time, everybody, thank you for listening.